We've named our AI company AIQ. It's probably about 2.5 years in the making now, and we're very, very excited about bringing an MVP to market very soon. The concept behind it is very simple. We're probably the first AI business out there to fundamentally validate an individual's baseline. Okay. What that means is you can use this for vetting purposes for people that want to start a new job, a new career, new business, what have you. And we can also use it for testing for signs of vulnerability and neurosity for an existing workforce. So once you know someone's baseline, if they deviate from this, those early detection points could prove vital. And also in that vetting component, you can determine the skill set as to what someone really is before they start. Obviously, I'm from a recruitment background, so we see a lot of CVs day in, day out. When we meet the individual in an interview prior to sending them to a client, the CV quite often doesn't match up to the individual. So sometimes a good CV doesn't necessarily mean a great candidate, and vice versa. So if we were to strip back to someone's baselines, we know their full aptitude, their full skill sets, and what they do with what they have, how will they handle healthy stress, which you find in workplaces, then you're going to be much more accurate in your hiring process from this tool.
So tell us, which aspects of the recruitment cycle are you trying to change?
Okay, so originally when we did this, we set it up primarily for the vetting purposes. So obviously, because we've come from a recruitment background, that's the part where we have most to play in. Okay, we went in search for problems, and there's many procedural problems. That's why the industry exists in the first place. I think even in Australia, the cost of a bad hire is $70 billion per year, which is massive. The vetting, the inaccurate vetting, okay, which leads to that, is really where our focal point has been. This is where this product has come about, because there's so much tech out there to try to alleviate unconscious bias, the human error, someone being sold to in an interview and then being told what their job. And there's numerous examples of loads of variables which are out of control. This is an attempt to alleviate that. But that being said, we've gone in on that component. There's probably about 7 stages in the life cycle of an individual, from initially being contacted by a company to when they leave to either retire or start somewhere else or have a break and so forth. You can use this at every single stage, which is what makes it very unique. And the more that you do go through our program, our software tool, it's a test fundamentally. The more that you do the test, the better the results. So we get more accurate findings, we get more findings, if you like, and at that point, that's when we establish the baseline. So we know the real Callum, and we know, maybe even before you do, that it might be something that's bothering you, that's going to affect your performance and your the purposefulness of your day.
What types of roles that you find this is most applicable to?
We'd like to think it can be used in every context, but we can probably target certain jobs. Okay, so on the monitoring side of it, you've got the high risk roles. Okay, so frontline healthcare, people in the mines with fly in, fly out, spending time away from their family, high stress related roles. This is probably a very, very good HR tool for those people to maybe pull them out of that situation that's causing them a problem early, if required. Okay. Grad recruitment at the other end of the scale is going to be fantastic, because the grads enter the market with little to no experience, so they've got a really tough job trying to get a foot in the door in the industry that they choose, with lots of people in exactly the same situation at the same time. So this would probably be a really good way to differentiate that you've got some core ability and they're backing the right horse in the first place. And then you've got your exec roles, and things where you can go a little bit more acute into where the hire is at 100% or nothing. So yeah, I'm 99% on you, Callum. But that isn't what we need for this role. There's still something that's not quite right. So it's such an important hire. You really must know who you're taking on board. So those are types of roles we probably attack first. I can see it being very useful in the government side of things, education, and thus forth. But it's not going to be a hindrance in any position. The test itself, for example, should only take about 5 or 10 minutes to do. So it's super convenient. It's not a burden for an individual to do. It should have an element of enjoyment about it, a bit similar to how gamification would be. So it's kind of gone down that genre. So if you can put this into all process, then yeah, there's a benefit for everyone.
So if you look at the current marketplace at the moment, what types of companies in Australia, for example, that are using these types of tests in a way to screen candidates?
So no one's using this test yet because fundamentally this doesn't exist. Okay, what is being used is psychometrics, gamification, AI in the sense of video interviews and phone interviews, where they assess the language and the behaviour that people have. This gives out your cognitive ability, your learning style, your personality, how you're going to handle situations, and it gives you what I would say more of an educated guess. Okay, so things start to get a lot more accurate off those types of tools, but they're still not surefire, and we take it to another level. So we have an evolution on those things. The types of companies that use those is straight across enterprise. Enterprise, government, all the corporations, straight across the board. They're all using these in one way, shape, or form or another. They are growing rapidly in the SME market, so they're seeing the value of it as it's becoming more affordable, more widespread. Some choose not to use it still, but obviously, these costs of bad hires exist, and it's probably affecting those people more.
So is this something that's widespread in terms of doing psychometric and various forms of assessment, or is this unique to certain types of roles and certain types of industries that do more of these? Or are you seeing a big divide between categories of companies that do and categories of companies that don't? I mean, the conventional methods today.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. So if we stick on psychometrics specifically, which actually incorporates, there's a variety of tests out there as well. If we go with the umbrella term of psychometric, it's very rare that you'd get to do a psychometric for a contract role, for example, because they need someone yesterday, and there's other process in place. And there's certain types of jobs, like for example, we do lots of construction recruitment, and to try and pull a site manager in to do a psychometric pulls out a few choice words here and there. They have no time for it, so you can't get them to do it, and you still need them to do the role. So that also leads itself to part of the problem with psychometric. A psychometric test generally takes about an hour to do. Now, these tests, which you do, especially on the personality side of things, identifies your personality within a workplace, which probably is not going to change for the next 5 years. Okay, so in essence, you don't need to do it for another 5 years. But what you find, you go from interview to interview to interview, you kind of do variations of the same test again and again and again, and it gets tedious. It's not particularly popular. The outcomes, you can already tell them, actually, here's another copy of one I've done before, but their HR insist on you doing it for this business. So it's not as popular as it could be, which is where we see we've got a unique points in the market, because it's a pressure test. It's short, sharp, accurate, and it's you can sit in doctor surgeries for a lot more time than this, so we can do it for all of these roles, and without it being too much of a spanner in the works, if you like. The outcome is for the candidate as well, so they get some really good information themselves, and the more they do it, they can actually upskill. Okay, so you can actually get used to handling pressure and put yourself in a situation where you need to use your initiative, handle pressure a bit better, think on your feet, and that sort of thing. So there is some value to doing it as well. So the more you do it, the better it is.
In terms of the pressure test as a tool to screen candidates before hires, how widely is this adopted today, or is this a very new concept in itself? I don't mean just the AI part of that, but just as a pressure testing method as a way of screening?
So pressure tests, okay, probably the most primitive form of a pressure test would be a behavioural type interview. Okay, I remember I did one many years ago, early in my career back in the UK. I had an interview with Monster, and it's my 5th interview. So I was already interviewed out. There's only so many times I can talk about my experience and what I want to do. But I really wanted to join Monster, so they told me I've got a behavioural interview, and they had 2 people in there, very clear cut, good cop, bad cop. I knew which one was which. And this guy, the bad cop, he was a very good bad cop, it has to be said. And he just kept coming in. He goes, "We haven't answered the question." So the other guy asked the question. I've answered it. He goes, "But you haven't answered the question." So I thought, okay, all right, let me rephrase this. Let me make it simpler. I answered the question again. "You haven't answered the question." And he's getting confronting with it. He's getting in my face. Okay, well, I'll give it another go. Simplified it again, explained it a different way. "But you haven't answered the question." And I thought, this guy for real? Is he being rude, or is he slow? I don't know where I go with this. And he did it that much that then the penny dropped to realise this is a behavioural interview. They're testing how flustered I get, how annoyed I get, how I articulate that, and so forth. So that there is a pressure test in its own right, and they learnt enough about me, and I was prepared for it. I knew I was going in for this. Probably when it comes to technicalities, though, when technology first come into this market, it's probably with the military. They have a pressure test, depending which military you're going to, which lasts about a week in the vetting process. So a lot of it's physical, mental, and so forth, but they have a lot of technicality in it. Now, there's obviously lasting a week is very extreme. For obvious reasons, you're front line in probably in the world's worst case scenarios. So they need to know for sure exactly what you're made of, how you're going to react when your back's against the wall. So there's a lot of value there. So these things do exist, but it's to an extremity. So to take that, what lasts a week, make it last 5 minutes, and make it mainstream is really quite hard to do. This is where our AI specifically has pulled it together and made it a possibility. So if you come from the military end of it with the extremities and pulling it all back in, and then taking the psychometrics in the existing science, the existing proven tests, combining it, put it all together, that's what we've got. We're very excited by it. We're getting lots of interest. Those obviously NDA'd up that we've shown everything to properly have always been keen. No one said that's a terrible idea. Industry experts, occupational psychologists, scientists, high-end developers and so forth, they've gone through it in quite fine detail. They're very excited by it, and that's something that really motivates me to make sure that we get this to market sooner rather than later and actually get people to experience this, because as a pressure test goes, I think I will fail my own test. But that does excite me.
How did you come about these in the first place? I mean, this is profound. It's revolutionary, to be able to do that. But what's your journey been like, and how did you, did you just wake up looking for a solution or a problem? I mean, how did you come about this?
Okay, so my overlaying business is Purple Patch Consulting. That's a recruitment business. Our tagline with Purple Patch is the science of recruitment, okay, which we've trademarked. Now, what that means to me and to anybody else checking us out is we look at the process of recruitment at a molecular level. So we look at every tiny stage and see how we can improve it, how we can make it faster, better, sexier, whatever the case may be. A lot of people, obviously, with agency recruitment have a bad experience. More often than not, people have a bad experience. And that bothers me because I work very hard in this area. And I'd like to think that people have a positive viewpoint of my profession. So to look underneath every single stone and look at every little stage, see what we can improve, it is very important to me. Now, there's many problems. There's many things that we could try to change. This was the biggest one. This led to the vetting stage, as we mentioned earlier. And this is the big problem. So, as a client, if you've ever taken someone from an agency, you pay 30,000 person plus $30,000 plus their salary, and it didn't work out, you're going to have a very sour taste in your mouth. That's in the vetting. Okay, I want to prevent that from happening. I don't want that on my hands, and this is where this came from. And then subsequently, it has further value later down the line. So that's where it came from. Solving the problem. What I found when I was trying to solve these problems is initially I tried to go the human way. So, okay, so if it's an interaction, I'm going to make sure I interact with everyone, and more humane it is, the better. That's hard to do with hundreds to thousands of people constantly. So then, inadvertently, it brings you towards tech. Now, tech's fantastic, but it has its limitations, which then takes you to AI, which really is expansive, exciting, and it really can bring the human element into tech, and that's where this works. So our tool has 3 types of AI in it, and what's unique about it is they all behave completely different, and they all have to communicate with each other. So that comes with its own problems itself. But obviously, the more complex it is behind the scenes, the more simple it is up front. That's how we want to get it. But that's how we come across with it. The pressure test itself, the moment was quite literally just a light bulb moment with me, though. So I was discovering, going down a path. How can I fix it? How can I fix it? How can I fix it? And I think I had a glass of red wine in my hand at the time, and it's a lovely red wine. And it came on. I thought, right, that's it. I've got to write something down, and that was it. And here we are.
And how did it go from? I mean, clearly you know the problem really well. Coming from the industry, the problem was obvious, was right in front of you, and you recognize it, you understand it. How did you go about confronting technology and AI in particular? That's not your off-the-shelf technology that people understand.
Absolutely, and I think AI is something that's pushed around a lot now. It's very hard not to notice it, even if you're not techie. I think there's a lot of things that pretend to be AI that are not. And I think it's also a marketing ploy in some cases. And I think it adds value to some technology. It's like anything though. So, yes, I'm not technically strong. I definitely am not AI strong in the slightest. But there's also things out in my profession that I'm not good at. You can go to accounting, I need an accountant for that, and so forth. So I'm a strong believer, is if it's not something that's in my remit, so I'm not going to try and do it myself. I'm going to find the best person who can do it. And I started to do exactly that. I started to take the beelines for, you guys, AI Ventures is a really good shout for that. You verify through your incubator program what we do and put your expertise to it, and I learn from that. I develop my concept. I need to understand my business. I need to implement, but it also means that I can converse with the technical experts and just marry that up from concept to fruition to reality. So it's really about putting the right people together and understanding wholeheartedly you can achieve very little just on your own.
So as you thought about building the product, but before even thinking about is this something we build, or is this something we buy? Is this something that's already out in the market? Is this something we can, get commercially off the shelf? Maybe there are other solutions that are out there that maybe you can buy, rent, borrow, etc. How did you decide that this is something you're going to have to go and build out?
So by the time I've had an idea, like with any idea, the first thing I do is research. Okay, if it exists and or if it's gone out there and it hasn't worked, or it exists and I didn't know about it, then I go and work out from there. Now, this was quite hard to research because I couldn't find it anywhere. The parts in the military that I did find, it's the military, so they're quite cagey about what they tell you. So that's quite hard to find out as well. And then I realised, in all fairness, there's a strong chance that it doesn't exist yet. That's why I can't research it. So then I need to really think about creating the products. Now, it isn't until you start speaking to the experts where you can pull it all together, you realise then what technologies you need. So if I need to do voice to text, for example, I need facial recognition, I need this. I'll speak to someone like yourself, Callum, and I'll work out what I need. Now, there's lots of moving parts there. You're quite right. As you develop the project, you then decide, yeah, for a variety of reasons, do we just use something that exists maybe with Microsoft or whomever, and put that in and plug everything else in around it, or do we just build that part ourselves? For me, because there's a few moving parts, what I've found is it's been a mixture for us. And I think if you are creating something brand new, it's always going to have to be something you also have to build. Okay. If we were replicating something that already exists, we could probably do the same, use existing technologies because it's already there. So in our case, it's a combination.
So at what point do you kind of go, well, I've got an existing business. You identify that there is a commercial opportunity in a problem area, and you think, oh my God, this could go somewhere. How do you decide how much time you invest in that vis-a-vis your day job?
Good question. So COVID's been the spanner in the works with that one. In some cases, it's also been a plus for us. So obviously, as a recruitment business, we've pretty much spent a year on the shelf because no one was hiring, and if they were, they didn't want to pay for our services. So my business as usual dropped significantly, which enabled me to spend more time on a project like this. Okay, so we're probably a plus side to the COVID story, if the truth be known. Where I dedicate my time, obviously, I still need to keep a roof over my head, and I'll do what I need to do to keep the dollars rolling, keep people happy, and keep everything moving, keep the clients happy. But we set deadlines, you know. There's team members that are waiting on things from me, which I can be maybe even just the communicator between teams and that. We'll have this done by Friday. We have this. So if you've got a deadline and someone's waiting, you make sure it happens, even if you're working till midnight to make that happen. But what I have noticed, the project's got a lot of momentum. And it's the right project when the momentum itself starts to push you along. So it's not me driving it, banging the drum, and off we go. Let's make this happen. The people that have bought into the project are now pushing me along. That they're faster than I am, and that for me is indicative of it being something special. That deserves my attention, deserves my time, and deserves it now.
And at what point did you think you went from, well, this is a great idea, let's start investing in a team? That's when it gets real.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So through AI Ventures, one of the terms that is thrown around quite a bit is bootstrapping. I've got very good at bootstrapping. It's now officially on my CV. It's a skill I now have, and I'm probably shy on a bootstrap or two as well. Things are very organic, but I think your biggest commodity is time, and everyone's time. Your time now, and everyone here in this room, I appreciate they're part of my journey. So I appreciate every minute anyone ever gives me, which makes this project come to life. That's our biggest investment, and that's where the team is at. Hopefully that answers your question.
And how have you gone about building up your team? It's hard bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is hard. It requires capital sometimes, but more than capital, it requires energy. It requires motivating the team. There's a lot of work. If anybody understands HR, that's really your expertise. How have you gone about building up a team and getting it to where it is at today?
So the trick is with any building of a team in any situation, you're asking people to invest their time, effort, energy. The key's down to the first person. It really is. That first hire, whichever shape or form that takes, is vital. You take that wrong person on, then you can't replicate, you can't attract others, okay? Because things need to happen when you're not looking. Things need to be happening on this project whilst I'm in here. Yeah, and they are. And it's come from the first person that's bought into the vision, the concept, the idea, and then the next person comes along and it works from that. And it's the same in any business. You put a new team, you want to put a sales team on. So your sales manager has to be absolutely on point to then attract the BDMs and sales consultants or whatever. You get that first hire wrong, then it just isn't going to happen. So I put a lot of emphasis on that. So it's also a lot of the proofs in the pudding and what we're trying to fix, you know. So it's just proof on that bad hire, what we're trying to prevent in the product itself. So it's kind of self-replicating.
So when you had your first hire, who did you pick, and what was the consideration for what you were looking for in the marketplace?
Interesting. So, and I will mention this person because they deserve a significant pat on the back. And this person came in as a first hire in some respects, but for something else, and ended up focusing on this. Okay, which we found a lot of, that people levitate towards it. When I try to put them over here, no, we like this one. And that person, you know very well, would be Michelle. Okay. Now, Michelle, like myself, isn't technical, so it's quite an interesting first hire on that basis. But we talk every other day on this project. We're working significantly on this project to make sure that when it's backed by the right person that can really take it to market properly, and give individuals and companies the chance to benefit from the evolution of this type of technology. For me, it was just their motivation to get going in something like this. So it wasn't just a job, and I think that is something that everyone needs to resonate with. No one's just doing a job anymore. It's really, you know, to find your purpose, what you're passionate about, what you're good at. Are you playing to your strengths? Would you do this week in, week out if money wasn't in existence? You know, and Michelle's one of those people. She gets this. And she's been an absolute godsend. So if you're listening, Michelle, thank you very much.
So how do you go from your first hire and then identifying from your first hire between yourself and your first hire what the gaps are, and then filling out the gaps and the rest?
Yeah. So obviously from that, we've got two people that are bought into the concept, and we need to then start to create a product that's only going to be technical. Okay, so we start working with developers, primarily back end in this case, whilst working on the research side of it as well. And we start to pad it out now. The moment you start doing is when you start to unearth the problems. Well, actually, you know what, this is fantastic, but as it stands, we can't do this. We need that. And that's where you know, it starts to expand. You start to have different conversations with different people to find out, well, can you help me with this? You know, this is not something we know, but it's been identified something that we need, and you plugged it in accordingly. So I think we've got a team of about 10 people working on this now, mostly development, and they're working very hard. So we're just on the cusp of the prototype now, so I'm getting very excited by that. Between the prototype and MVP, we'll probably double that up. And then the MVP, that's it. You'll see us everywhere.
So we've covered a lot of these concepts about prototyping, MVP development, co-developing with potential customers, prospects, etc. What's been the journey like in developing prototypes, and how much input you've had from external parties vis-a-vis you know, your own personal input?
So we've had lots of input recently. The incubator I did through you guys was very good. Obviously, you got a different topic every week. Some topics I was all over. Some topics was completely alien to me, and I'm learning from ground zero, if you like. And there's a lot of peer review there as well. So there's lots of people that are sharing their views, and not just on the pitch, just like in general on that particular week's topic, on whether it may be. So that was a really good experience and very fruitful for the project, and it probably started to build the sort of momentum and the catch-ups that we need with the team. Because obviously each week, guys, I need you to do this, I need you to do this, because I don't want to look stupid on the Zoom meeting at the end of the week. But that was something that moved it along quite nicely.
Things always take longer in development, prototype. I mean, there's slippages. There are, slippages of time. How are you managing these types of challenges and complexities in development?
Things that do always take longer. I've now learned developers are on a different time zone to us. So 1 week in development is in real life is like 2 weeks in development, or the other way around, whatever it is. But yeah, it's always longer, absolutely. And then let's just say that a developer is on time, then I do expect it not to be quite what I was after as well. So maybe what I've got in my head isn't what I'm going to be seeing. And one thing I have noticed is when that also happens, it's very crude what you see. So when it isn't polished, it's like, well, I mean, this is quite scary. I thought this would be a lot sexier than this by now. So it is. I find it frustrating. I try not to air my frustrations because I don't think it's particularly helpful to anybody. I'm very mindful of it when I set my deadlines. But I think what's important that people know when you set a deadline, it isn't just me saying that let's do this by Friday. Is okay, we need this by Friday because this person needs that for their part. So other people are waiting on you. And if you genuinely care about the team you're working with, you don't want to be the person that's slowing everyone else down. And that tends to get these deadlines moving on quite nicely. But even so, I still would love to have had this ready 6 months ago.
In terms of your development team and building out your team, how much of a pressure test did you give them?
Very good question. So, none really. I haven't put them through any type of situation like that. For this case, I probably should do. So no, the way they've come on board and what they're doing for us has been quite reciprocal. So the pressure test probably wasn't particularly relevant in this case, but absolutely, I know for a fact they're all itching to try it and to give it a go once it's live. So hopefully they'll hurry up.
Any deadlines you're able to share?
So I believe my prototype will be ready within 2 weeks, and I know they're listening, so it's public. The prototype or part of the prototype will be live for demo on the landing page as well, so people can have a little play with it. At that point, we'll start moving out to universities, which we've already agreed with, to start doing some testing, get some percentile data and so forth as well. So that will come straight after that prototype launch.
You mentioned that you're looking at making this available for candidates themselves to learn from that experience. How are you going about that? I mean, obviously, this is a tool that organizations would use to vet their candidates. But you also mentioned that this is a great tool and an asset for candidates. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, so the trick is obviously we can talk about clients, companies, organisations all day long, but it's a lot more holistic than that. And you're quite right to point out. And I make a point of making sure that it is for the individual as well. So if you go back to the graduate example, obviously, when they're trying to get a foot in the door, they know they're really offering more to that business, and the person who has that maybe year or two experience on them, this will help them. This is an empowering tool for that individual for being the right person with just the inherent skill set that they bring to the table. The other side to it as well is the more you take the test in the life cycle of that business, okay, the more that they upskill as they do it. So we only charge for the first test, we don't charge for the second or third. So they can literally do it as often as they like, and constantly upskilling themselves. Obviously, it's a company benefit and an individual benefit. Okay. Probably the flip side, the only time where it's probably outside of business is probably when we're going to be doing it with the universities initially to get the data up and what have you, because they will take a lot away from that outside of an employment scenario. But apart from that, the rest of it's within an employment scenario.
Like in any test, it can be gamed.
Yep.
How are you making sure that this is not something that once it becomes mainstream, people are trying to game it out.
In what sense?
You know, so for example, like if you think about tests, psychometric test or various types of test, IQ test even, people have become very good at gaming it.
Yeah.
You know, you do them enough number of times.
Yep.
I mean, you know, online. I mean, you can go online these days and you can get a lot of tests, of different types. The traditional tests, the more conventional tests, and people have become very good at passing, or if not passing with flying colors on those types of tests. It's almost like they've figured out what do employers look for, what behaviors they have to display in order to get in.
So that's quite interesting. So you would think that is the case. There's a lot of study around this, and this is mostly in the psychometric side of things, where people believe that they can play it to their advantage. They're actually quite smart, these tests, that, unless you're going really cheap down the market and right down the bottom, and it's pretty clear cut what you're doing. You go to a decent comprehensive psychometric, it's very hard to do that. So you like to think that you're putting it one way because you think that's what the client wants, but then it's reworded a few times over, it will catch you out. And there's a lot of proof on this, which is I find fascinating. But what they can't really test for is who's taking the test and what have you. And plus, also, as I said, with the psychometrics, only really last 5 years, so you are who you are, you know. With ours, the first time you would be doing the test is in an interview situation, so you'd have the people there with you. Plus, it also puts on the facial recognition, okay, which then becomes your login for the subsequent tests, okay. So there's no way the fraud component can come in. Within it, we also check for the body language, the verbal cues, and we can determine if someone's lying or not. So there's an extra level or two on whether someone's cheating it or not. And we've set it up with the algorithms. It's very, very sophisticated. This is very, very, very hard to cheat, if possible at all. Okay. It's completely randomized, so no two tests will be the same. So that's that. But the only thing you could do is over a period of time, as we touched on before, is you can upskill, you can develop through this, you can get a little bit better at handling pressure. So we give a few outcomes at the end of it, so you can pick out, you know, what someone's good and bad at, as well as yourself. And we give you what we call an AIQ score. Okay, so you will get a score. That score will improve a little bit over time as you develop those skills, and that's still accurate. Okay, whether that constitutes you cheating or not is two different things. What it does say is you've got a little bit better at thinking on your feet. You've got to be a little bit better at handling pressure. You've got a little bit better on manifesting healthy stress in the workplace, and you're better for it. And all you got to do is look at your careers. All of us early in our career, the first time your boss shouts at you, oh my God, my life's over. You know, this is horrendous. The second, third time, and you're 10 years in and something's happened, we've been there, we've done it. We just control, we look at what we can control and just make it happen. And it affects us a lot less. So that healthy stress, which is ever present in a workforce, we do naturally upskill and get better at handling. So it's like a rising tide, if you like, and that subsequently is with the test itself as well.
There's a lot of concerns today about bias in recruitment, especially if it's technology driven or AI driven. How are you making sure that the approach that you're taking does not inject bias, if anything, helps with the unbiasedness?
Yep. Conscious bias, it isn't actually that much of a problem because there's legalities and discrimination laws around that, and companies are pretty much switched on for that these days. There's always an exception to the rule. The problem is unconscious bias, and the unconscious bias is very hard to get rid of when it's human to human. Okay. And you'll find that with organisations, they start to get lopsided because all their line managers have all replicated each other. This is the person I'd go for a beer with, and they're all it's all gone one way, you know. And when you see it like that, it's really clear cut to see the unconscious bias there because we're making decisions based trusting those line managers or heads of departments and so forth. So technology is needed to pull that to one side. Now, one thing you pointed out there is there's been examples of bias within technology, and that's a different thing. The nice thing about that is that it's been identified, like with racist digital cameras and whatever, where it's just gone wayward. Now, from that, we can learn where others have gone wrong. It can be set up so that that mistake doesn't happen. We've still got the human eye to check. Hold on a minute, is it going that way, and we can monitor it. And yeah, and also you've got the ethics around it. So there's a framework, there's guidelines and ethics primarily for the government. If you base yourself on that, then you're probably going to be pretty much okay, well enough to even claim you've removed unconscious bias as it stands until proven otherwise. A scientist in Melbourne who works specifically on that. That's his specialism and his PhD. And so he knows what the boundary is, what works, what doesn't work on the line of questioning. Is a question too masculine, too feminine? Is it leaning? Is it going to be harmful to the person to receive that question? So we got that happening up front as well.
Most AIs today are often only as good as the data we feed in, and the unconscious bias and the developers that work on that. What's your journey like in acquisitions of data, or taking an approach in making sure you've got sufficient amount of data such so that you have an AI that is reasonably predictable?
Yeah, so that's a bit chicken and egg, obviously. So if you go to the psychometric example, that's gone off historical data. A lot of it's birthed in the US of A, and it's on a percentile basis and updates and proves itself a few times over. So if you was to set up a psychometric assessment today, for credibility, you'd want to plug into one of those existing. Okay, that's the way that works. With this, if you was to have the software as a service for your business, then you actually don't need it in this case. Okay, it's not to say that we won't have it. We don't need it because what you're doing is you're benchmarking against other interviewees. So you got 5 interviewees for this one job. You've got an idea where you think you're going to go, but let's put them all through this. Now they're comparing against each other. That's live, real-time data, comparative to that a lot more objectively. Yeah. Thereafter, the data is on the individual. So you took one of those people on, and you got their baseline. So the data's only on that individual. The rest of it's not relevant. Okay, whether they go backwards and forwards and whatever, it has no purpose to have hundreds of thousands on top of that. That being said, for the AI to work properly, we need to punch it through and see where we can identify problems and flaws and iron it out. So that's where the value would come from doing that in the first place. A lot of that be universities. We've got a few host companies willing to do it. I'm sure you'll be putting your teams through this as well. Not that I should be assuming, but I'd be surprised if you said no. and that's to iron out the technology. But in the comparative to the psychometrics, we don't need that long-term historical data, which was also could be a hindrance. So how people are culturally and work 15 years ago is very different now already. So even that data, how do you differentiate that? So that's another podcast, I think.
So you mentioned 2 weeks in terms of a deadline to get a prototype out.
Yep.
And you mentioned sometimes 2 weeks means 4 weeks. And sometimes 4 weeks can mean also 8 weeks.
Yeah.
But generally, in anywhere between a month and 2, I can imagine a prototype, and I can imagine you giving a call and saying, Callum, let's go test this out with the recruitment process that we have, for example. Who do you see as your first set of customers?
So obviously testing is one thing, so we'll get that out to quite a few people, including yourself and the prototype, what have you. When it comes to MVP, we'll be looking to go to market hard and fast. I won't put too much out there right now, but the plan is to go enterprise. We want a blue chip enterprise client initially. That's where it's going to be most effective. That's where we can make it work, and then from that, everyone can see, well, if it's worked there, it's easier to then go to enterprise number 2, enterprise number 3, and scale and everything else that goes with it. So as opposed to going in on the SME market and build it out little by little, we'll be going the opposite way on purpose.
Are there any specific industries or type of a customer in Australia that you think would be an ideal MVP customer number 1?
The consultancies are a given, okay, because they're always very receptive to this type of thing. You know, when you look at Deloitte's, they've got loads of gamification. They are proprietary too, and they like to be ahead of the game. For example, these types of organisations. But I think when I first come up with the idea, you work with a scenario, okay, so this has come from in here somewhere. And I've got an end product. I can see the person doing it. I can see the interview being happy. I can see everyone happy with it. And that particular scenario in my head was always for a banking institution. It always was. They have massive grad recruitment. There's lots of importance on the role. There's lots of governance. There's lots of frameworks I need to adhere to. So a bad hire in a bank is a massive problem, apart from the rest of it, you know. So in my mind, that was the scenario that's there. So maybe it will go that way. We'll see. Hopefully they're listening.
If you had somebody to call out and saying, you know, Tom, I want to be your pilot customer, what would be the criteria that you'll say, yeah, you'd be the perfect pilot customer? I mean, some of the pilot customers are probably really out there listening and thinking, yeah, you know what, I think I can see myself trialing this out.
Okay. So the perfect pilot customer for me is someone that actually does have a plan to do a significant amount of recruitment, but also varied recruitment. So not just the same thing again and again. We're looking at all levels, you know, entry to top end and hard to fill positions. Really randomise it up, because that is where we'll get the enriched data responses back. So covering all cross sections, and really for a good pilot, I want a tough customer. I don't want the yes person and whatever. I want someone to say, Tom, that's good, but and give it back to me, because that's where we're going to learn. That's how we're going to move faster, quicker. I want to find flaws in it. I want to find problems. I want people to dislike it for a reason, so I can go and fix that reason before it goes open.
Pilot customers in most enterprise technology companies, for startups in particular, can either break or make a startup. Getting the wrong pilot customer as your first pilot can sometimes take a startup in a direction that may or may not necessarily be positive to the company. It can take you in a direction that may be suitable for that company, but may not be suitable for everyone else. And so, do you have a exclusion criteria for a pilot customer that you'd go, you know, I'd like to try you guys out first, but not you first?
I think my exclusion criteria would be recruitment businesses, in all fairness. It's not to say that recruitment agencies are bad or anything else like that. They're an intermediary, first of all. Okay, so I want the first-hand feedback from the client. But also we are a recruitment business. So I could do this myself. So there's not necessary information, and ultimately I'm benefiting a direct competitor. That's fundamentally commercial suicide. So that probably my immediate exclusion. I suppose the only other thing is maybe if someone's got a history of untrustworthiness, you know, if I check it out and they've caused problems for others in the past and that, leopard doesn't change their spots, really. So I'll be a little bit mindful on the research, but that you just don't know. You don't know till you check it out, really.
So in terms of the pilot, how much time do you want to give yourself, again, in an ideal world, things don't often pan out that way. But in an ideal world, in your head, how much time do you give yourself for a pilot before you think you'll be comfortable? And again, it's kind of a bit like COVID, right? Vaccine, where you're going to go, well, I don't know how this is going to go, but, you know, there are a couple of boundaries. How much time do you think you want to give yourself in a pilot that kind of gives you a solid sense that this is kind of in the right direction before you go mainstream?
Good question. So with the pilot, there's going to be a lot of work that's going on in the background to get to the MVP. The technologies involved are quite comprehensive, so we need to make sure they're all in tune. They can deal with volume. We've eliminated the biases, and everyone's happy. The user experience is good. The data's accurate. We can make some claims to say, right, here's a percentage. This is exactly what we can promise we can do right now. That will take some time.
You're thinking 6 months?
Exactly
a
what
year.
I'm thinking. You're a mind reader. Yeah, it's 6 months is what I've got in my head. Now, I think with any startup founder of something of an idea, you want that to be 6 months minus 6 months. You really do just want it to happen. I think that will take a solid 6 months for us to do that properly, and that's really where investment sweet spot is. That's really where someone's going to grab a bargain, if you like, within that window.
So just to sum, you're thinking 2 weeks to anywhere between 2 weeks and 4 weeks and 8 weeks to get your prototype, and then a 3-6 months, maybe 8 months pilot.
Yep.
With your, sort of closed beta or whatever terminology that you like to use. When do you think this becomes mainstream?
I will have this out to I'll put you through a full-on pressure test before Christmas. But goes with that time frame. I think I think mainstream. I think that's more than plausible, and especially as it's gaining momentum as well. We talk about things always taking longer, and we're talking development years. There's some things are going quicker, some things are speeding up. Okay, there's a few components of the concept which are finishing early. In all fairness, so we could be surprised.
A year can be a very short time or a long time by Christmas. Depends on inputs. Often depends on inputs. Sometimes not so much. Sometimes if you're clever, you can reduce the amount of input. What are some of the biggest obstacles do you have today in speeding this along?
Most of it comes with talent, so I'd like to put more people on a full-time basis to really drive this home, and also at the top of the game. People who really do know their stuff, because obviously there is a component of a lot of it being new. Someone needs to be A1 to deliver that, not just have familiarity with something. So that's where those frustrations are. Plus also, just with general business on the back of COVID, we all have individual limitations as well. So COVID has caused a problem in that sense that we're still licking our wounds financially from the year that was, and that prevents the 24/7 individually on it.
At what point do you sort of go, this becomes AIQ becomes my full-time job?
I would say by the end of the year, because at the moment that's mainstream. That's what I do. I'll be living and breathing it. I'll be doing the test regularly myself, so I can constantly find the flaws, see the updates, see the bugs, see what's working, what isn't. My face will be all over the place, pitching it left, right, and centre, making sure that everyone possible can benefit from the tool that now exists, which isn't there to date. So yeah, by then, absolutely, that's all I'll be doing.
Now, obviously, there are a number of things that cannot be compressed in time. It's like making a baby, right? It takes 9 months. You can't speed that up. So there are certain practical limits to what can be compressed and what can't be compressed. What are some of the things that you think can be compressed?
There's lots of components. So, we're running a business in general. So, you can speed up on the marketing, for example. So, people are excited about something that's about to come. You can pre-launch and test the market and things like that. So, that's something that has gone very well over last year. Our marketing's been superb, for example, if we don't say so ourselves. So there's things that are in our control that can go well. Okay, and that's just one department or one example. There's other examples of running a business. A business isn't just your team of developers. There's a whole lot of people pulling together in the same direction, and there's other things that can be sped up. Absolutely.
And you mentioned today outside yourself and Michelle, you mentioned the bulk of the 10 people are developers.
Yes.
At what point do you have in your mind to transition that out such that you've got a full stack? I don't mean full stack in technology sense, but I mean a full stack in terms of diversity of skills, diversity of talent.
So that'll be when we start getting revenue in. So client one, we've got some revenue, we've got the tests happening, they've got the annual subscription, so we can budget and forecast. We know we can cover people. Then we start putting those people on to then replicate. So you're talking your sales guys and so forth to start padding out the business. So the moment revenue comes in, that gets reinvested into the business to scale quickly.
And given your expertise in recruitment, who would be your first job title, job description to the person you're going to bring on board straight after the developer?
So that's a tricky question. So fundamentally, it'd be some sort of sales related role is the first person you bring in, but it need to be senior. So it'd actually probably be someone like an operations manager with a sales capacity. Okay, so not necessarily BDM is your first person. It's an operations manager who is a BDM component and then can build around that individual, so they can offset for myself and I can just do what's needed for the business and move around and float around as is needed. So that probably, the operations manager would probably be my key hire.
So as you think about your expertise in recruitment and thinking about how long it takes to bring somebody on board, how are you building up your talent pipeline?
So that's always a constant. So you speak to any agency, the talent pipeline it's a tap we switch it on and off. It's a constant. It's always there. We have a very good feel for the market, who's looking, what their price points are. Is it a buoyant market? Is it not? What's spiking? What isn't? And these are conversations I have with clients all day, every day, especially right now, post-COVID. We're having lots of conversation around that, but the talent pool, it only ever gets bigger.
And so what do you look for when you want to bring people on board for your company, for AIQ?
I'm a bit of a stickler for someone's motivation as to what they want to be doing. So, for example, if I bring on a recruiter, I tend not to take on a seasoned recruiter. I go for someone that's junior, and I train them up because they really want to be doing it, and they've got the soft skills, transferables, to achieve that. And I like to see people grow. I like to see them develop. That's what gets me out of bed, if you like. So, that's my sweet spot, and I suppose it kind of stays with most of my hires.
Yep. So what's next? I mean, in a year's time or 3 years' time, is this the next unicorn?
Absolutely. I've got no question about that. The evaluations come in pretty good. The interest is there. The interest is coming from people that are traditionally very critical and pessimistic. And because I know the size of the problem, and I know that this is new to market, of course, absolutely, it's unicorn. I do back this one outright.
So we're just up at the top of the hour. I'm just going to hand this over to our executive producer and see if there is any questions from the audience.
Yes, we do. And this question is directly from one of the real estate consultant. And he's pretty quick. He's pretty, he wants to implement a strategy where he wants to get a busy professional folk into becoming a pilot customer. And this, he wants to use it in a case where he's working on a fully working MVP. So he would like to get your advice on this perspective.
So he's interested in being a pilot for us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So he'd have to wait on my developers 2 weeks for starters. So a little bit longer than 2 weeks. Share contact details. We'll verify this and make that happen. And thank you very much for thinking of us.
Sure.
So with that, Tom, thank you so much for coming on the show with us.
My pleasure.
This has been an honor, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks to the team. You've done a great job.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. See you soon.